The first rabies vaccine had to be injected into the abdominal wall. The 40 injections needed to achieve a lasting effect saved lives. That is, of course, if help was not sought too late. A modern drug is simply given intramuscularly in the shoulder area. It takes a course of 6 treatments to defeat the viruses. For most of the last century, the global rabies situation was not only ambiguous, but in some regions critical. If help did not arrive immediately, or if the victim was not vaccinated at all, the patient was doomed to die. No other treatment could guarantee survival. The WHO statistics look worse than a horror film. Every year, between 50,000 and 55,000 people around the world die as a result of being bitten by rabid animals. Just think. The official figure is 95% in Asia and Africa. The 21st century has become a storehouse of medical discoveries. In the 20th century, it turned out that rabies could be treated, just like any other infection. This was discussed in relation to the amazing case of the American girl Gina Geese. She was only 15 years old. She was not vaccinated but remained alive despite developing symptoms of this dangerous disease. On the 12th of September 2004, Gina caught a bat. The animal bit her finger. Her parents thought there was no danger because the wound was almost invisible. The bleeding stopped almost immediately. It was 37 days after the incident. The girl's temperature rose sharply to 39 degrees Celsius. A robust picture of clinical symptoms was observed: double vision, speech problems, tremors. At the end of the incubation period, signs of CNS damage appeared. The girl was taken to a medical center where rabies was confirmed. By this time, an experimental method of curing the disease had been developed. Full trials had not yet been carried out. The parents agreed and signed a written consent form. They had not lost hope that their child could be saved from a terrible and painful death at such a young age. The patient was put into a coma with a tightly dosed mixture of midazolam and ketamine. The brain was almost paralyzed in order to stop the infection from progressing. She was then treated with a combination of amantadine and ribavirin to fight the deadly virus. Blood tests were carried out constantly. The aim was to build up a sufficient level of antibodies to clear the body of the deadly infection. It took only 6 days to get a positive result. The doctors kept her in this state until her immune system began to produce enough antibodies to clear the virus. This took 6 days. The girl was brought out of her coma, and the tests were repeated a month later. They confirmed that the disease had been beaten. At the same time, her brain function was almost completely unaffected. The girl successfully finished school and a year later received her driver's license. Gina graduated from college with the intention of going to medical school to get her degree. She wants to be a veterinarian or a biologist. Today, she still sees the fight against rabies as her life's work. Based on the results of a successful treatment, a protocol was developed. It was called Wisconsin or Milwaukee. After this miracle, anyone with this terrible disease had hope that there was not only a real chance of survival, but also of keeping brain activity in a practically healthy state. Unfortunately, this was the only case of success. The first option was used in 25 patients, but none of them survived because of vascular spasms. To prevent this, the ribavirin was removed and replaced with another drug. Out of 10, only 2 survived. This deadly infection continues to reap a bloody harvest almost every year around the world. Then, according to the results of an epidemiological study, it turned out that the patients who were bitten by bats survived. This means that there is a different type of strain to that of dogs or other animals. It seems to be less dangerous to humans. In 2012, full-scale studies were carried out. A panel of experts went viral with a surprising discovery. It turned out that there were people in the Peruvian jungle who had already developed immunity to rabies. They had probably been bitten by bats from generation to generation. Some of them could be carriers of a dangerous virus. These lucky ones had managed to cope with the deadly problem without outside help. According to the results of surveys and studies, this attack is not so terrible for them. It turns out that the devil is not as black as he is painted. The infection was not 100% fatal. In the Amazon jungle, local tribes have lived side by side for centuries with dangerous carriers of rabies. These are true vampire bats. Their bites have caused outbreaks of rabies not only in animal populations, but also in human communities. It is almost impossible to get to the nearest hospital in time from these wild and sparsely populated places. In a number of regions, the only means of transport is the local Indian's canoe. Samples were taken from both animals and people. 7 samples contained ready-made antibodies that kill rabies viruses as soon as they enter the body. Neutralization is no worse than if the victim had been vaccinated in time. Only 1 in 7 people with antibodies received the vaccine. The rest became ill, but did not die from the virus. In fact, they became ill almost asymptomatically. A panel of experts reviewed the scientific data for another 2 years before deciding to publish the results of an amazing study. They concluded that the bat strain of the virus may not be lethal. With repeated bites, an antibody response occurred naturally, and human intervention was not required. The amazing process of natural vaccination takes place by itself. However, this phenomenon should still be studied closely, because science does not tolerate hasty conclusions, as the probability of being wrong is high. It is possible that the Indians came into contact with rabies-infected bats with a low level of replicative activity. Therefore, their rate of reproduction and damage to the body was such that the body was able to deal with the disease on its own. The level of pathogenicity, which poisons the host for a relatively short time, could also be lower. Perhaps the high variability played a dirty trick on the disease. It also had to adapt to these animals' bodies in order to thrive in initially unusual conditions. Rabies had to go through a significant sequence of beneficial mutations. Perhaps it is these animals that carry varieties of rabies that are less dangerous to human populations. Mutations in the genome of a disease-causing virus could mean that the virus has lost much of its ability to respond to the immune system's response so that it can recognize the disease more quickly and destroy it quickly on its own. Doctors before us have been studying rabies infection, and they continue to do so today. For a long time, researchers hoped that herd immunity would overcome many infections. The idea is that if most people are sick, everyone's protected. Herd immunity only works for infections that are passed from person to person. For example, rabies is spread by the bites of animals, mainly dogs. So it's unlikely that everyone will be protected at the same time. For the same reason, it is impossible to eradicate the disease completely, as was the case with smallpox. Even if everyone was vaccinated, the virus would still circulate among animals. It can infect any mammal, and it is impossible to catch all of them. This means that everyone needs to remember simple precautions. Avoid wild and unfamiliar animals, especially those that behave suspiciously. Do not approach stray dogs and cats on the street. If a pet is allowed to roam freely, it is worth vaccinating it against rabies. If bitten, wash the bite immediately with soap and water and go to the emergency room as soon as possible. Even if you have naturally occurred antibodies, we strongly recommend that you get a rabies vaccination if you've been bitten by a bat or other animal. In this way, you will not allow the disease to end your life prematurely and deny your future because of your own complacency. Risking your own life is unforgivable folly. There is also no guarantee that the fatal error of the researchers has not crept into the conclusions of this group. No measure will be superfluous when it comes to health, future achievements, and victories yet to come in the measurable future.